David Robinson was denied a table solely because of his skin color, unaware that he was a successful restaurateur ready to take down their business of bias. This battle was about to get personal. What happened next will shock even the most seasoned observers. But let's start from the very beginning. A scorching summer day blanketed the streets of Manhattan, reflecting off the mirrored skyscraper windows and forcing passers-by to squint against the blazing sun. David Robinson, a successful black restaurateur well accustomed to the city's relentless pace, stepped out of his sleek black sedan and made his way toward the entrance of the prestigious LeBlanc restaurant. His confident posture, steady stride, and impeccably tailored dark blue suit immediately attracted the attention of several onlookers who were accustomed to seeing affluent clients frequent this part of town. LeBlanc was considered one of the city's most elite establishments, a favored spot for celebrities, politicians, and business moguls. David knew that the restaurant had long held a reputation for catering to an exclusive clientele, but he wanted to experience it firsthand before executing his ambitious plan, opening a rival establishment in the same neighborhood. Pushing open the heavy glass door, David stepped into the restaurant's cool, luxurious interior. The air was rich with the sense of expensive perfume, freshly baked bread, and white truffles. The spacious dining room, designed in creamy gold tones, was half full, with well-dressed couples, business professionals in tailored suits, and solo gourmands leisurely perusing the menu. At the reception desk, the restaurant's manager, George Miller, a middle-aged white man with neatly trimmed graying hair and cold gray eyes, glanced at David briefly before turning his attention back to the reservation book, as if he hadn't noticed him at all. David, accustomed to such glances, approached and politely said, "Good afternoon. A table for one, please." Miller barely concealed his irritation, his gaze sweeping over David's flawless attire. His perfectly fitted suit, polished leather shoes, and luxury wristwatch. All signs pointed to wealth and sophistication, but to Miller, David's skin color undermined everything else. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked," Miller said, turning away and flipping through the reservation pages indifferently. David slowly nodded, his lips pressing together. "Really?" He cast a glance over the half-empty dining room where several tables remained unoccupied, draped in immaculate white tablecloths. Catching his gaze, Miller's eyes flashed with irritation. "We serve only regular guests. Tonight we are expecting a high volume of reservations." "I'm afraid I can't help you." His tone was flat, yet laced with unmistakable disdain. David felt a familiar wave of frustration rise within him, a mixture of indignation and bitter disappointment. Over the years, he had encountered this type of treatment countless times. But now he was no longer just an aspiring chef. He was a successful businessman, the owner of a thriving restaurant chain, a man who had already proven his worth in the fine dining industry. "Interesting," David murmured, his gaze unwavering. "It seems this place truly values its special guests." Miller pursed his lips and remained silent, returning to his paperwork as if David were invisible. A young waiter standing nearby with short chestnut hair noticed the tension in the air and awkwardly averted his eyes. He was well aware of the empty tables but dared not challenge his superior. Not wanting to cause a scene, David exhaled slowly and slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Thank you," he said evenly, turning to leave. As he stepped through the door, Miller added with a smug smirk, "Better luck next time." David paused briefly, feeling a sharp pang of anger, but didn't turn around. Instead, he responded calmly, "Some places just aren't worth coming back to." Once outside, David pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and, getting into his car, said, "They just made a huge mistake. Start working on our new restaurant. It needs to be 2 blocks from here, and it's going to outshine LeBlanc." The anger in his chest quickly transformed into determination. He wasn't just planning to open another restaurant. He was going to create a place where everyone would be welcome, where quality and hospitality would rise above prejudice. The following morning, David Robinson sat in his spacious office on the 25th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, scanning through the meticulously detailed business plan laid out before him. The panoramic windows offered a sweeping view of the bustling city below, but his focus was on the documents in front of him. His company, specializing in launching high-end restaurants across the country, had already achieved remarkable success, yet this new project held a special significance. He was determined to establish a restaurant in this particular neighborhood, right across from LeBlanc. On his sleek glass desk, neatly arranged, were photographs of LeBlanc's luxurious interiors and printed copies of customer reviews his team had gathered over the past few weeks. Despite its polished reputation, the feedback revealed a different story beneath the surface. Recurring complaints such as cold service, pretentious atmosphere, and feeling unwelcome. David's sharp eyes fixated on one sheet of paper with a bold statement written across the top. "We must embody true hospitality." He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the table thoughtfully. "This isn't just about food," he said, turning toward his assistant Carl, a sharply dressed black man with a confident demeanor who had been by his side for the past 5 years. "We're going to create a space where people don't just come to eat, but to feel valued. We need to emphasize culture, respect, and inclusivity." Carl nodded, sliding over a set of blueprints. "We've already identified a few prime locations. There's one spot in particular, right across the street from LeBlanc. I've set up a meeting with the realtor for tomorrow." David narrowed his eyes as he studied the floor plans. "That's perfect. We'll be right in their line of sight, but instead of arrogance, we'll offer warmth and authenticity." Carl smirked. "Think Miller will be able to handle it?" David's lips curled into a grin. "He'll have no choice. We're not just opening a restaurant. We're setting a new benchmark." A few hours later, the conference room was filled with anticipation. Seated around the large table were his team of designers, marketers, and financial advisors. The presentation displayed on the screen outlined their ambitious vision: cozy yet contemporary interiors with warm lighting, live music, and a menu inspired by African American and international cuisine. "We need to honor our roots," David stated with conviction as he stood at the head of the room. "A blend of traditional flavors with a modern touch. The atmosphere should be both welcoming and sophisticated. I want guests to walk in and know they belong." Loretta, the executive chef, an elegant black woman with years of culinary experience, raised her hand. "I've already begun experimenting with the menu. I'm thinking about spicy shrimp in a rich sauce, slow-braised lamb infused with southern spices, and tropical-inspired desserts that will set us apart." David nodded approvingly. "Fantastic. But the key will be how we present it. Our service needs to be exceptional. Every guest should feel like they're part of something special." Carl clicked through to the next slide, marketing strategies. "We're planning an aggressive PR campaign, social media influencers, features in major food magazines, partnerships with local artists. I also propose organizing a series of charity dinners to connect with the community." David smiled, satisfied. "Perfect. They cater to exclusivity, but we'll show them that fine dining should be for everyone." By the end of the meeting, it was clear. This wasn't just another business venture. It was a statement. The next day, David and Carl arrived at the potential location, a grand space with high ceilings, expansive windows, and a prime view of LeBlanc across the street. Sunlight poured in, illuminating the potential of what could soon become their flagship restaurant. "This is it," David said, scanning the spacious interior. "The light, the space, the energy. It's perfect." Carl grinned. "Can you imagine Miller's face when we open?" David chuckled. "Let him watch. We're going to redefine this neighborhood." Meanwhile, across the street at LeBlanc, George Miller sat in his office, staring at the report in front of him. It contained detailed information about the new restaurant opening nearby, and in the owner section, one name stood out, a name he instantly recognized. Robinson, he muttered under his breath, his jaw tightening. He remembered the confident man he had dismissed at the entrance just days ago, and a wave of unease washed over him. Calling for an emergency staff meeting, he tried to mask his growing anxiety. "We're not going to let him ruin our reputation," Miller barked, slamming his hand on the table. "Our clients come here for prestige, not for some neighborhood feel-good nonsense. We will double down on exclusivity. No changes." But deep down, a nagging feeling told him that the competition ahead wouldn't be as easy as he hoped. Back at his office, David stood by the window, watching LeBlanc's staff scurrying about in preparation for the inevitable. He knew the game had just begun, and he was more than ready to win it. Several months had passed. David Robinson's new restaurant, Legacy, was nearing its grand opening. Workers were putting the final touches in place, hanging paintings by African-American artists on the walls, bartenders testing signature cocktails, and head chef Loretta personally ensuring that every dish met her exacting standards. The air was filled with the aroma of slow-cooked lamb with spices, caramelized onions, and fresh basil, while the carefully designed lighting created an atmosphere that was both cozy and elegant. Standing by the large windows of Legacy, David watched the scene unfolding across the street at LeBlanc. The restaurant's manager, George Miller, was visibly agitated, barking orders at the staff, his movements hurried and tense. The once calm and collected establishment was now buzzing with nervous energy, interior updates, stricter service protocols, and a surge in promotional efforts. A large banner with the slogan, "Upholding the finest traditions of excellence," was prominently displayed on their windows, a clear sign of their awareness of the impending competition. Meanwhile, the marketing campaign for Legacy was already gaining traction. Social media influencers were sharing mouth-watering photos of the restaurant's unique dishes, local newspapers praised its vision of inclusivity and cultural celebration, and online reservations were filling up months in advance. As the soft glow of Manhattan's streetlights bathed the city in a golden hue, an eager crowd began forming outside Legacy on the night of the grand opening. Guests and journalists alike stood in anticipation, cameras flashing as they captured the arrival of celebrities and food critics. The buzz in the air was undeniable. Everyone was eager to see what David Robinson's new venture had to offer. David, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, greeted his guests at the entrance, shaking hands and exchanging warm smiles. Among the attendees were neighborhood residents, influential figures in the restaurant industry, politicians, and artists. Each guest was welcomed with genuine hospitality, a stark contrast to the cold, exclusive atmosphere of LeBlanc. Inside LeBlanc, the atmosphere was anything but celebratory. Despite Miller's efforts to maintain an aura of exclusivity, the dining hall was noticeably less crowded. The once loyal patrons now sat in subdued silence, their gazes frequently drifting across the street, where Legacy bustled with life and laughter. Miller paced between tables, scrutinizing every plate, ensuring the wait staff performed flawlessly. He desperately tried to keep up appearances, yet the tension in the air was palpable. His frustration grew with every glance stolen toward the thriving restaurant across the street. "They're just a passing fad," he assured a longtime patron, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "People always return to what they know." But deep down, Miller felt the grip of reality tightening. Legacy wasn't just another restaurant. It was a movement. Within days of its opening, Legacy took the internet by storm. A leading food critic published an article titled, "A New Standard in Hospitality: How Legacy is Redefining Fine Dining." The piece highlighted the restaurant's commitment to cultural heritage, impeccable service, and an inviting atmosphere that made every guest feel valued. What resonated most with readers, however, was David's backstory. The successful black restaurateur who had once been turned away by LeBlanc and used the experience to create something truly remarkable. Social media exploded with support. They refused to seat the man who ended up creating something better. One Twitter user wrote, "This is what happens when hospitality is driven by passion, not prejudice." Influential business publications soon picked up the story, sparking discussions about racial discrimination in the fine dining industry. Celebrities voiced their support, praising David's vision and commitment to inclusion. The growing buzz put LeBlanc under immense pressure. Their attempts to salvage their reputation, discounts, VIP events, and social media campaigns failed to attract the crowd they once had. One evening, unable to resist the curiosity, George Miller walked into Legacy. As he entered the restaurant, the lively ambiance, filled with laughter and conversation, contrasted sharply with the tense silence he had left behind at LeBlanc. The staff greeted him with polite smiles, but there was a quiet understanding in their eyes. They knew exactly who he was. David noticed Miller as soon as he stepped inside, but waited until the manager approached the reception desk hesitantly. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," David said with a calm, polite smile. "Welcome to my restaurant." Miller cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "David, I was just curious to see what you've built here." David's gaze remained steady, his voice composed but firm. "Funny how things change, isn't it? Now you have the chance to see what true hospitality feels like." Miller's face flushed and he shifted awkwardly. I'd like to book a table." David glanced at the reservation list, then turned to the hostess with a knowing smile. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." The words, an exact echo of what Miller had once said to him, hung in the air. Miller swallowed hard, realizing the bitter irony of the situation. Without another word, he nodded and walked out, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. David watched him leave, feeling a quiet sense of closure. This wasn't about revenge. It was about proving that true success comes from inclusivity and respect, not exclusion and prejudice. As the evening continued, guests enjoyed their meals. Servers moved gracefully through the room, and the warm, inviting energy of Legacy filled every corner. David took a moment to step back, watching it all unfold. His dream was now a reality, not just a restaurant, but a symbol of change. A few weeks after Legacy opened its doors, its popularity continued to skyrocket. Every night, the restaurant was packed to capacity. Guests delighted in the signature dishes, the warm atmosphere, and the soothing live music that created an ambiance both cozy and energetic. Social media was abuzz with glowing reviews. Patrons raved not only about the exceptional cuisine, but also about the remarkable hospitality. "You feel like family here," one guest wrote. "This place is more than just a restaurant. It's an experience." Meanwhile, across the street, LeBlanc was steadily losing its once loyal clientele. Many of its regular guests had begun favoring Legacy, where they were welcomed with open arms rather than cold exclusivity. In his office, George Miller sat with a tense expression, staring at the latest financial reports. The numbers painted a grim picture. Revenues had dropped by nearly 40%, and complaints from remaining customers were growing by the day. People were voicing their dissatisfaction with the stiff atmosphere, the outdated menu, and the aloof attitude of the staff. Desperate, Miller convened an emergency meeting with the restaurant's investors. "We need to make changes," he declared, looking around the table at the stern faces of the stakeholders. "If we don't act now, we'll be pushed out of the market." One of the co-owners, an elderly man in an expensive suit, tapped his fingers irritably on the table. "And what exactly do you suggest?" he asked with a skeptical tone. "Lower our standards? Offer discounts? Our brand is built on exclusivity." Miller sighed heavily. That's the problem, he admitted. Legacy is giving people something we never could. Genuine warmth, respect, and a sense of belonging. A heavy silence filled the room as the investors exchanged uneasy glances. Deep down, they all knew the truth. LeBlanc was no longer the pinnacle of fine dining it once claimed to be. Meanwhile, David Robinson was strategizing his next move. Watching the competition struggle, he knew that complacency wasn't an option. Instead, he sought to strengthen Legacy's position even further. One afternoon, he gathered his team in the conference room and announced an initiative close to his heart, a special charity dinner to support the local African American community. On the evening of the event, a large crowd gathered outside Legacy. Journalists, influencers, and prominent figures from the culinary world came to witness the occasion. Standing in front of the guests, David spoke passionately into the microphone. "Food is more than just taste," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "It's culture, history, and connection. At Legacy, we're creating a space where everyone belongs, where diversity is celebrated, and where people are valued beyond their status." The crowd erupted into applause, their admiration for David's mission evident. Just then, George Miller appeared at the restaurant's entrance. His face bore a mix of frustration and resignation, but with a deep breath, he stepped forward and approached David. "Robinson," he said, forcing a polite tone, though his discomfort was palpable. "It looks like you've won." David studied him for a moment before replying, his expression calm and composed. "I was never trying to win against anyone, George," he said with a small smile. "I was just creating something I believe in." Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Give me one piece of advice," he asked after a pause, his voice almost pleading. David looked around at the bustling restaurant, filled with happy guests and a staff radiating warmth and professionalism. "Start seeing people as more than just customers. It all begins with respect." Miller sighed, nodded, and quietly left, the weight of his mistakes hanging heavily on his shoulders. A few months later, LeBlanc closed its doors for renovations. A sign hanging on the door read, "Temporarily closed for rebranding." But everyone in the neighborhood knew the truth. The restaurant was done. Meanwhile, Legacy continued to thrive. One evening, David sat at a table in the corner, watching his staff greet guests by name, witnessing Loretta in the kitchen, orchestrating the culinary magic, and hearing the laughter and conversation that filled the air. His mother, a proud woman who had always believed in him, sat across from him, smiling warmly. "You've accomplished more than just success, son," she said, squeezing his hand. "You've changed the game." David raised his glass of wine, his eyes reflecting the satisfaction of a battle won not through competition, but through integrity and vision. "Yes, Mom," he said with a gentle smile. "I just showed them how things should be."